When he laughed at my career dreams, it wasn't just a small chuckle, it was a cruel reminder of how little faith he had in me. His words carried a weight that cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Every time I talked about what I wanted to achieve, he found a way to make it sound like a joke. He said I was wasting my time, that I was better off lowering my expectations, that I should stop chasing impossible goals. And though I stood tall on the outside, inside I felt my confidence cracking under the pressure of his mockery. It was easier for him to belittle me than to support me, because he couldn't see beyond the small world he chose to stay in. But that mockery, those constant jabs, those moments of humiliation, they began to ignite something inside me that I didn't even know I had. I started remembering every smirk, every sarcastic remark, every time he dismissed my hard work as nothing more than a hobby. His disbelief became fuel, his laughter became a challenge. If he thought I was incapable, I would show him that not only was I capable, I was unstoppable. I would not let his words define me. The very thing that was supposed to break me down began to rebuild me stronger. Every insult he threw my way became a reminder of why I couldn't quit, why I had to keep going even when everything around me seemed stacked against me. I learned that anger, when directed toward proving yourself, can turn into the sharpest form of determination. I remember sitting alone after one of his cruel comments, tears in my eyes, telling myself that if I gave up now, I would be proving him right. And I refused to give him that satisfaction. I started working harder, staying up later, refusing to let exhaustion or doubt overpower me. I dove into my studies, my projects, my goals, with a hunger that surprised even me. Every time I felt like quitting, I heard his mocking voice in my head, and it pushed me further. I turned his voice into my personal alarm clock, my reminder that I had something to prove. He thought he was tearing me down, but in reality, he was shaping me into someone fierce, someone who no longer needed approval, someone who thrived on resistance. Slowly, I began to see changes. Small victories that others may not have noticed, but I cherished them like trophies. Every milestone I reached was a direct contradiction to his words. And with each one, my confidence grew. The girl who once hesitated to speak about her dreams because she was afraid of being laughed at began to speak with conviction, with certainty, with pride. His laughter no longer embarrassed me, it motivated me. Because I realized that the people who laugh at your dreams are often the ones too afraid to chase their own. He mocked me because he couldn't imagine greatness for himself, so how could he ever see it in me? I became addicted to proving him wrong. Not just for him, but for myself. I wanted to know how far I could go, how high I could climb, how much I could achieve if I stopped letting his voice dictate my worth. Every rejection letter, every failed attempt, every mistake became another layer of resilience. I didn't crumble under the weight of disappointment because his voice had already prepared me for it. Instead, I adapted, I learned, I improved. His mockery, instead of destroying me, had given me the armor I needed to survive the battles ahead. What he thought was weakness in me became my greatest strength, and the day came when I no longer flinched at his comments. I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't even need him to acknowledge my progress. Because I knew deep down that he had unknowingly created the fire that fueled my rise. What he mocked, I mastered. What he laughed at, I achieved. And though he still didn't realize it, every time I took another step forward in my career, I was silently turning his ridicule into my victory. His mockery had become my motivation, and I carried it with me, not as a wound, but as a weapon, sharp enough to carve out the path he swore I could never walk. The late-night struggles he never saw were the battles that defined me. The hours when the world was quiet, but my mind was loud with determination. While he slept peacefully, confident that his words had discouraged me enough to keep me small, I was awake at my desk, poring over books, writing, rewriting, learning, failing, and trying again. The lamp on my table became my only companion, its soft glow lighting the paper spread in front of me, marking the hours I sacrificed to build a future no one but me believed in. I pushed through exhaustion, through the aching of my body, through the doubt in my mind, because those hours felt like secret bricks I was stacking to build the foundation of my success. He never saw the trembling hands holding a pen at 3 in the morning, or the swollen eyes staring at a screen until sunrise. He never knew the price I was paying in silence, because I refused to let him or anyone else see how hard I had to fight to keep my dream alive. There were nights when I wanted to scream, when every failure seemed to whisper that he had been right all along, that maybe my dreams were too big for someone like me. But instead of breaking down, I turned the weight of those whispers into resolve. I told myself that pain was temporary, but giving up would last forever. I would close my eyes, take a deep breath, and continue. My body was tired, but my spirit refused to give up. Every late night became a test, a measure of how badly I wanted this life I envisioned. And the truth was, I wanted it more than anything. I wanted it enough to sacrifice comfort, enough to trade sleep for growth, enough to choose struggle over surrender. Those nights became the proof of my resilience, a secret story only I knew, a story that the world would one day see reflected in my success. It wasn't easy. The silence of the night often amplified the noise of doubt inside me. I would think about my failures, the mistakes that kept repeating, the progress that felt too slow, and I would question whether I was truly capable. Tears often blurred the words on the page, and my hands sometimes shook with frustration. But each time I felt the weight of despair pressing down, I reminded myself that success is not built in moments of ease, it is carved out in moments of struggle. The nights when no one is watching, when the applause is absent, when only discipline keeps you going, those are the nights that shape champions. He never saw those moments, and maybe that was better, because those struggles weren't for him to witness. They were for me to endure. I remember one particular night when the electricity went out, and I sat there in the dim light of a candle, refusing to stop working. My friends were sleeping soundly, the world outside was quiet, and yet I stayed awake, pushing myself because I couldn't allow excuses to win. That candle became a symbol for me, a reminder that no matter how dark it gets, even the smallest light is enough to keep moving forward. He wasn't there to see that. He wasn't there to see me fighting with myself, battling the exhaustion, the hunger, the loneliness. He only saw the results much later, never the sacrifices that made them possible. People often admire success when it's visible, but they never ask about the nights behind it. They never wonder about the hours of practice, the endless failures, the tears, the sacrifices, the doubts swallowed quietly in solitude. And that's what he missed. He thought my dreams were silly because he never witnessed the work I was putting in. He never sat beside me while I typed until my fingers ached, never watched me highlight page after page until the colors blurred, never noticed how my body ran on caffeine and hope when sleep was no longer an option. He laughed because he only saw the surface, but beneath that surface was a war he couldn't comprehend, and though he mocked me during the day, I found strength at night. I learned discipline when no one was watching, I built consistency when no one cared, I sharpened my mind when no one believed in me. Those nights taught me that dreams are not sustained by motivation alone. They require sacrifice, endurance, and the courage to face the silence of doubt head-on. He may never know about the late-night struggles, but those struggles became my invisible victories, the ones that prepared me for the life I was building. And when the world eventually recognized my success, I carried with me the quiet knowledge that it wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it was the countless nights he never saw. Every rejection turned into fuel, even when it felt like the weight of failure was crushing me. I can still remember the sting of those moments, the emails that began with, "We regret to inform you," the applications that went unanswered, the opportunities that slipped away despite my effort. Each rejection felt like a reminder of his mocking words, like proof that maybe he had been right when he said my dreams were nothing more than fantasies. But instead of letting those rejections define me, I started collecting them in my mind, stacking them one on top of another until they built a fire so strong it could not be put out. Every no was gasoline poured onto the flames of my determination. Each failure became less of a wound and more of a weapon. At first, rejection crushed me. It made me cry, made me doubt myself, made me want to give up. But the more it came, the more I realized that rejection wasn't the end of the road, it was the beginning of redirection. It wasn't a sign that I was unworthy, but a test of how badly I wanted what I was chasing. I began to understand that rejection is universal, that every successful person has faced it, and that those who rise are the ones who keep moving despite the pain. I told myself that each rejection wasn't proof of my failure, but proof that I was trying, that I was moving, that I was alive enough to chase something bigger than myself. And with that shift, rejection stopped being an enemy and became my strongest motivator. His laughter echoed in my mind whenever I faced those closed doors. He had said I wasn't capable, that I would never achieve anything worth remembering, that I should stop embarrassing myself by aiming too high. But every time someone turned me away, I heard his voice and I used it as fuel. If the world thought I couldn't, I would show them I could. If doors slammed shut, I would find windows to climb through. I refused to let rejection break me, because giving up would mean proving him right, and I couldn't allow that to happen. His doubt became my push, and rejection became my training ground. There were moments when I would sit with my rejection letters, staring at them until the tears blurred the ink. In those moments, I would remind myself that rejection doesn't diminish talent. It builds resilience. It forces you to confront your weaknesses, to grow stronger, to adapt. I started using rejection as a mirror, asking myself what I could do better, how I could improve, how I could sharpen my skills so that the next time, the answer might be different. Rejection became less of a dead end and more of a detour, guiding me toward paths I hadn't considered, teaching me lessons I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Sometimes, rejection pushed me to work harder than I ever thought possible. I would stay up later, study longer, practice more, determined to make myself so prepared that one day, someone would have no choice but to say yes. I began to crave rejection in a strange way, because each one meant I was still in the game, still moving forward, still alive in the fight for my dream. Rejection reminded me that I wasn't standing still, and that was enough to keep me going. Looking back, I realized those rejections were blessings disguised as setbacks. They forced me to develop patience, to build persistence, to find strength in silence. They gave me stories to tell, scars to carry, lessons to pass on. They shaped me into someone unshakable, someone who didn't crumble at the first sign of difficulty. He may have mocked me for chasing what he thought was impossible, but every rejection I endured became proof that I was braver than he ever imagined. While he laughed, I was learning. While he doubted, I was growing. While he thought rejection would crush me, it was quietly sculpting me into someone unstoppable, and so, rejection became my ally. It became the push I needed when exhaustion tempted me to stop. It became the whisper in my ear that told me to keep going, even when no one believed I could. It became the fire that kept me alive in the darkest moments, reminding me that nothing worth having comes easily. Each rejection, instead of ending me, became the very thing that built me into who I was becoming. Every no was one step closer to the yes that would change everything. Building success brick by brick was never glamorous, never quick, never the kind of story that makes people cheer in the moment. It was slow, exhausting, and often invisible to the world. While others looked for shortcuts, I learned that real achievement doesn't come overnight. It comes from small, consistent steps that no one applauds, from sacrifices that go unnoticed, from choices made daily in silence. Each brick I laid was a habit, a skill, a lesson, a sacrifice. And though progress often felt painfully slow, I began to realize that it was in this slow building that strength was formed. He mocked me because he never saw the structure I was creating. He thought dreams were built in grand gestures, but I knew they were built in patience, discipline, and relentless effort. I started with the smallest things. Waking up earlier than I wanted to. Finishing tasks even when no one was checking on me. Choosing to learn instead of wasting time. Each of these felt insignificant on its own, but together they formed the foundation of my growth. I treated every day like another chance to place one more brick, to add one more layer to the future I wanted. There were days when the wall looked uneven, when I questioned whether it would ever stand tall, but I kept going because I knew consistency mattered more than perfection. Success wasn't going to arrive in a rush of applause. It was going to rise slowly, like a structure built with care. There were moments of temptation, times when I wanted to take shortcuts, to skip the hard parts, to look for easy victories. But every time I thought about giving in, I reminded myself that shortcuts create weak foundations, and weak foundations collapse under pressure. I wanted something lasting, something unshakable. And for that, I had to commit to the slow work, the kind of work no one sees, the kind of work that makes you question if it's even worth it until one day the results can no longer be ignored. He laughed because he thought I was wasting time. But time spent building something solid is never wasted. I noticed that each brick I laid gave me more confidence. Every skill I mastered, every problem I solved, every challenge I overcame added another layer of strength to my foundation. It wasn't about sudden transformation, it was about daily improvement. And in those small improvements, I began to see the shape of my future forming. He may not have believed in me, but I was building something that didn't require his belief. I was constructing a life so strong that no amount of mockery could bring it down. The truth is, building success this way tested me in ways I hadn't expected. It tested my patience, my resilience, my ability to keep going when nothing seemed to be happening. There were nights I wondered if I was working for nothing, mornings when I struggled to find motivation, moments when I thought about walking away. But every time doubt tried to pull me back, I reminded myself that real success demands persistence. I learned to find pride in the small victories, the completed assignment, the finished project, the little milestones that seemed meaningless in the moment but became essential pieces of the bigger picture, and slowly, the structure began to rise. What once looked like scattered efforts began to form a clear path. The wall I was building was no longer invisible. It was visible in the way I spoke with more confidence, in the opportunities that started to open, in the way people began to notice the work I had been doing in silence. He had thought my dreams were castles in the air, but brick by brick, I was proving they were real, tangible, and strong. Each brick represented the refusal to give up, the choice to keep moving forward even when the progress was slow, and the belief that the future I was building was worth every sacrifice. What he never understood was that success doesn't require loud announcements or instant results. It requires patience and persistence, the willingness to show up every single day and lay another brick, no matter how tired, no matter how doubtful, no matter how much others laugh. That was the secret I had discovered, that greatness is not built in a single moment of triumph, but in the countless quiet moments that no one sees. And with each brick I laid, I was not only building my future, I was also building the strength to carry it the moment power shifted. Didn't happen with fireworks or a sudden explosion of victory. It happened quietly, almost unnoticeably at first. In the small ways the balance began to tip. For so long, he had been the one with the upper hand, the one whose words carried the weight of authority, the one who mocked me as if his opinion was the final judgment. But as I kept working, as I kept pushing through the sleepless nights and the endless rejections, I started to feel the ground beneath me change. I was no longer the same person he had laughed at. I was stronger, sharper, more confident. The more I grew, the less his words mattered, until one day I realized he no longer had power over me. That was the moment the shift began. It wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. I no longer cared for his approval, no longer feared his ridicule, because my growth had given me independence from his judgment. The very things he used to belittle me for had become the stepping stones to my success. Where he once had control over my self-worth, I had taken it back piece by piece. That shift in mindset was the first sign of power moving from him to me. He didn't even notice it at first. He still laughed, still dismissed me, still tried to belittle me. But his words no longer pierced me the way they once had. They bounced off the armor I had built from years of perseverance. His laughter became background noise instead of the soundtrack of my struggle. Then came the tangible shifts, the ones he couldn't ignore even if he tried. People began to take notice of me, opportunities started arriving, and slowly, the image he had of me as someone destined to fail started to crumble. He could no longer deny the results that spoke louder than his insults. For the first time, it was me who held the leverage, me who had something to stand on, me who had carved out a space of respect that he could not take away. The power he once had to define me, to make me doubt myself, to shrink me into silence, that power was gone. I had grown beyond the reach of his ridicule. I remember the exact feeling when I realized it. I was in a room where my work was being praised, my skills being recognized, and my voice being heard. He stood there, watching, and for once, he had nothing to say. His silence was louder than any insult he had ever thrown at me. It was the silence of someone who knew the tables had turned. He could no longer laugh at me without looking foolish, no longer mock me without exposing his own insecurity. That moment of silence was the clearest signal that the balance of power had shifted. The shift wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about freedom. For so long, I had lived under the weight of his doubt, the shadow of his mockery, the sting of his words. But now I stood free from all of that. My success had given me a strength he could not touch. The more I grew, the smaller he seemed, not because he had changed, but because I had. His voice no longer defined me, my achievements did. His laughter no longer hurt me, my confidence protected me. His doubt no longer mattered, because I believed in myself. And as the shift became undeniable, I realized something even more powerful. He needed me more than I needed him. The same person who once mocked my dreams now had to acknowledge the reality I had built. The same person who thought I would never amount to anything was forced to face the fact that I had risen higher than he ever imagined. The power was no longer in his words, it was in my results. And though he may never admit it, he knew it too. The balance had tipped, and it was never going back. That was the moment power shifted, not with a dramatic confrontation, not with shouting or revenge, but with quiet certainty. The strength I had built through years of struggle had finally placed me above his reach. He could mock, but it no longer mattered. He could doubt, but it no longer affected me. The person he once tried to keep small had grown into someone he could no longer control. That was the true victory, the one that changed everything. Signing the paycheck that silenced him was more than a transaction. It was the physical proof of everything I had fought for, the visible mark of how far I had come. The paper in my hand represented years of sleepless nights, endless struggles, countless rejections, and a determination so fierce that no amount of mockery could kill it. I had imagined this moment so many times, not out of spite, but as a vision of triumph, as a reminder that one day I would rise high enough to stand above his laughter. And there it was, the ink of my signature transforming into the final word of a story he thought he had written for me. He used to scoff at the idea of me building a career, sneer when I shared my dreams, and shake his head when I told him I was working towards something bigger. But in that moment, as my pen moved across the page, it was his silence that spoke the loudest. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The weight of the situation was already heavier than any words I could have said. Here was the man who once told me I would never make it, now holding a paycheck that carried my name, my effort, my authority. He had mocked me for dreaming too big, but now his livelihood was tied to the very dream he dismissed. I could see the realization in his eyes, that uneasy flicker when pride clashes with humiliation. He didn't want to acknowledge it, but the truth was undeniable. The power had shifted completely, and the balance that once leaned so heavily in his favor was now firmly mine. I thought back to all the times his words had broken me, all the nights I cried silently, all the mornings I questioned myself because of him. I remembered the sting of his laughter, the way he dismissed my achievements as meaningless, the way he made me feel small for even daring to try. Those memories used to haunt me, but now they stood as a reminder of everything I had overcome. My success was no longer just about me, it was about every insult I had turned into strength, every doubt I had turned into determination, every rejection I had turned into fuel. That paycheck carried the weight of every step I had taken to rise above his voice. What made the moment even more powerful was that I didn't have to say a word. I didn't need to remind him of his mockery, didn't need to list the times he tried to hold me down. The silence did it for me. The paper on the table, the ink drying next to my name, the reality of who was signing and who was receiving, that was enough. He couldn't laugh now. He couldn't mock. He couldn't belittle. The evidence was right there, impossible to ignore, undeniable in its clarity. I had become the person he said I would never be, and he had become the one depending on me in that moment. I realized that victory isn't always about loud celebrations or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes victory is quiet, calm, steady. It's the knowledge that you have proven yourself in such a way that words are no longer necessary. Signing that paycheck wasn't just about money, it was about respect, authority, and the undeniable truth of my journey. It was about taking back every piece of myself that his laughter had tried to shatter and putting it all into one final act that silenced him without me having to speak. The irony of it made me smile, not out of cruelty, but out of satisfaction. The very man who once told me my dreams were worthless was now holding the proof that they had built something real, something powerful, something bigger than either of us could have imagined. He had tried to make me feel powerless, but in the end, I had shown him that true power comes not from tearing others down, but from building yourself up. That signature was more than ink, it was the closing of a chapter, the sealing of a victory, the moment when silence spoke louder than all the laughter that had once tried to destroy me. And as the papers were handed over, as the transaction was complete, I knew this wasn't just about him. It was about me reclaiming my voice, about me proving that dreams are not foolish, about me showing that persistence can outlast mockery. That paycheck became a symbol, not only of my success, but of the undeniable truth that I had risen far beyond the reach of his doubt, and nothing could take that away from me.